Hello, my name is Jack Robson, though you may know me online as Jackhammer47, but I come to you today not as a guitarist, singer, audio engineer, or music producer, but as a PhD researcher at the University of Hull. And yes, I still stand by my statement in my previous advert, which can be found here, that heavy metal deserves more recognition. But now it's time to delve into what exactly I mean by this. I mean, isn't heavy metal studied the same as any other genre of music? And technically, you're not wrong, but that's not the full picture. The field of heavy metal study, or to be more specific in my case, metal musicology, is still a relatively new area of study despite the genre existing for more than half a century at this point. To give an example of this, I'm only the third person at the University of Hull to be earning their PhD through the study of heavy metal, with my two predecessors before me having only done this within the last 10 years by the time I graduate. So why is this the case? Well, despite the technical brilliance displayed by metal musicians and its effective growth from a single factory-working band to a fully diverse, multi-subgenre spanning global genre, is still very much seen as a working-class genre. But even then, in the realms of popular music, it is also very much seen as other in contrast to popular music's us. And for the most part, that has allowed the genre to carve out its own identity, irrespective of current trends and fads. Which is all the more reason I believe more research should be done into this genre, to see what lessons and knowledge can be gained and applied, not only in academia, but across music as a whole. So I should probably start by what I mean by us and them, or us and other, as I put it earlier, but whichever way you call it, the result is the same. It effectively refers to group mentality and division, and in this case, the us and them mentality has the general idea of pop music at large taking the us moniker, and heavy metal taking that of other. Now, as for reasons why it's like this, the simplest viewpoint is that there are way more non-metal fans than there are metal fans. So it becomes easy and logical to see why this works, but in reality it goes much further than this. It's pretty well known today about metal's connection to Satanism. I mean, you only have to look at album covers to see bands playing into the concepts of Satan and evil and stuff. But the actual reason this exists is effectively due to horror films and the influence they have. Exactly where the band Black Sabbath got their name, and their inspiration for writing songs with much darker themes. As such, as has been done before to more rebellious genres of music, metal was branded as satanic and evil. At first by Christians, but over time the idea spread, and now we see members of the general public even referring to it as a satanic genre. This, alongside legal battles in which parents blamed heavy metal fans for their children's deaths by allegedly hiding satanic lyrics and hidden messages telling listeners to kill themselves. Which, let's face it, has to be... no successful band would knowingly do this, since that's easily got to be the fastest way to destroy a fan base. I mean, you can't have a fan base keeping the band going without any fans. But regardless, these points, plus the added points of metal fans generally looking scary due to them generally having long hair, with myself, unfortunately, no longer being able to join in with that. But also tattoos and a love for black clothing. And it's easy to see how it was assigned the role of other to the rest of popular music's us. But of course, that's where the study of heavy metal, metal musicology, and my own research comes in. Before I get into the details of my thesis, one thing that should be understood is that a lot of these details can change at any point as I do more research, as new papers come out, and if my general direction slightly shifts. But this is where my thesis is at so far, and the general direction I'm going in. The current title of my thesis is Genre, Tropes, and Agency, Contemporary Aesthetics of Modern Heavy Metal. And as I'm sure you can guess, the thesis will focus on the current state of heavy metal and the genre's dualistic nature, in which one side embraces the genre's traditions and origin, and the other looks towards the genre's future, striving for innovation and progression of the genre. While I initially saw these two viewpoints coexisting in a paradoxical relationship in which one would have to prevail over the other to determine the future of the genre, I now see these two mindsets as part of the dualism of heavy metal, with both sets of ideals being necessary for the genre's existence. And of course, this isn't where metal's dualistic nature ends, but I'm going to save that till my work is actually finished, as I don't exactly want someone to just come along and piggyback off my research and try to finish it before I do, after all. As the title has hinted at, the main sections of my thesis will be divided into 3 chapters, each covering different aspects of the genre of heavy metal, with those aspects being genre, tropes, and agency. In total, my thesis will have 5 chapters, including an introduction, which will help lay out all the essential information about modern heavy metal before the following 3 main chapters, which will then be followed by a conclusion, bringing the thesis to a close. The chapter focusing on genre will explore metal's position within the broader scope of popular music and how its subgenres operate within it. Subgenres will play an important part of this chapter due to the large variety that exists within heavy metal. So, I will be examining the boundaries of heavy metal so I can find the limits of what heavy metal is, and then make use of various theories to help us understand how metal is able to exist in this dualistic nature, with subgenre topics that seemingly stand in opposition to each other yet simultaneously stay united under the overarching banner that is the genre of heavy metal. The next chapter will focus on the tropes and characteristics of heavy metal, though some of these points will also appear in previous chapter on genre, since it's very difficult to talk about and define various genres without referring back to overarching tropes that help define them in the first place. As such, as much as I will mostly still be talking about these same and similar tropes, in this chapter I'll be going over much more into the history and various details of these tropes, along with others, and once again highlighting metal's dualistic nature when it comes to the development of its tropes and characteristics. When I refer to the tropes as having a dualistic nature, in this case I'm referring to the genre's revival and incorporation of musical tropes and characteristics from both before popular music and from other popular music genres, and the genre's ability to evolve these tropes over time by influencing itself through prior bands, affecting the sounds and techniques used by newer bands, but with these systems allowing for all the tropes of the genre to become timeless and thus continually relevant in the modern music and culture of the genre. The third main chapter will again build upon the prior two as it begins to explore agency within the genre. As with the previous chapters, it can be difficult to describe the history of various aspects of the genre without referring to the culture of metal and the aspects outside of the music itself that influenced these changes to occur in the first place. But this chapter will be where these aspects of metal's culture will be fully explored. This chapter will explore how metal, despite being a music genre, is also seemingly able to act on its own, with its own agency, and with it being referred to as its own entity. I will also be exploring the genre as being a necessary cultural trope, and how it is seen from both inside and outside of itself, especially with how the genre embraces the negative thrust upon it from outside sources, in turn helping the genre create its own identity, born from the status of being other to the rest of music's us. The final chapter will be the conclusion, which will build upon my prior points to build my argument about how, despite the negative reputation placed upon the genre, metal's own culture has created an environment which all aspects of the genre are equally valid, regardless of the time period in the genre's history in which they were created, creating a unique musical ecosystem, allowing the genre to flourish regardless of outside influences. As part of this chapter, and to give further evidence to my prior points, the conclusion will also include a case study of a modern metal album to highlight how these points can be found throughout modern metal and its culture. So now that we've gone through the bulk of my thesis, let's get into some of the fun things I found throughout my research. Now, obviously, I'm not going to divulge everything I found or go massively into detail about the things I feel fine talking about here. I mean, after all, I've got to keep some things for my thesis and to give everyone an incentive to actually give it a read once it's all done. First one I'll talk about is down tuning, which is the act of tuning down from standard tuning, which for a guitar, when looked at from the low notes to high, is EAG, GBE, and for bass is EAD, G. From there, you can alter tunings to gain access to lower notes or additional chord shapes, though in metal we're normally going for those low notes. Though drop tuning does also allow for easier play of power chords, so it's kind of a mix of both when looked in that regard, especially when you consider tuning to open C for playing metal. In metal, it is commonly known that down tuning began when Tony Iommi would down tune his guitar to make it easier to play, given they had lost two of his fingers on his fretting hand, and they were cut off in a metal press accident at the factory he worked at before going full time with Black Sabbath. But that's not the full picture. While Tony Iommi did help bring down tuning back into popular music, musicians have been down tuning and added extra bass notes on instruments for years. The practice did, however, seem to die off with the rise of popular music. To see how much musicians like bass, you only have to look at the Octobass, which is a huge double bass / cello style instrument that is tuned down to C1 or around 32.7 Hz, just below the range of a standard modern electric bass. Though the Octobass in the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix, Arizona, as seen in Rob Scarlin's and Davey 504's video to the museum, is tuned down even lower to D0, or around 19.4 Hz, effectively so low that it can't really be heard and it is more felt. Even the modern trend of using extended range guitars and basses isn't actually anything new. You only have to look and see how the piano's low range extended over time to see that we've been adding low notes to instruments for years. Even with guitars, the jump from the lowest note on the Brock guitar, which was D3, to the lowest note on a standard tuned modern electric, which is E2, is the same distance to that of a modern 8-string, in which the lower note of that is F#1. So yeah, downtuning isn't anything new. Popular music just forgot about it. The last thing I'll talk about is the birth of metal's iconic drum sound, which most metal listeners are familiar with, that clicky high attack sound, which sounds very aggressive and works very well in a dense metal mix, allowing the punch and attack of the drums to really shine through. But where did this drum sound come from? Well, you got Metallica to thank for that. In metal, the first album to make use of this drum sound was Metallica's fourth album, And Justice for All, with the drum sound itself being a request from Lars Ulrich. Now, exactly where this timbre came from, we can only guess at, seeing as it was recently revealed in interviews that Lars forgot that he was the one who requested the drums be made that way. The best guess we can go with is how the band were going for more of a garage sound in contrast to the high production sounds heard on Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets. As such, it's probably likely the band made demos before going into the studio, and there's a good chance that Lars came to really like his drum sound from those demos. Similar stuff even happens today when producing music. People get tied to the sound of their demos. Over time, the drum sound has been refined from the more aggressive sound Metallica created, but you can first hear this drum timbre being first adopted throughout the 90s and evolving since then to the far more balanced timbre we aim for today. So that brings us to the end of this video, and I do hope you have enjoyed it. I know this is a little bit different to me talking about my thesis rather than doing a cover or anything like that, but I thought now was a good time to actually talk about what I'm doing outside of my YouTube channel. Although don't worry, the covers aren't going anywhere, I still have ones planned, but just all to know that there's going to be some uni stuff on here as well. So if you're interested in what I'm going to be doing next, be sure to subscribe to the channel. As I mentioned in my live stream, I'm going to be doing more live streams because I did really enjoy those. There's going to be more covers coming out. And hey, once I'm done with my work, there'll be more updates on that as well. So be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Until then, stay metal and goodbye.